When Tommy and Michelle Hunter met in 2008, they were both new Christians healing from troubled pasts. Growing up, they'd both been victims of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, leading them to lives of anger, brokenness, and violence.
My mom was a single mom. She dated a few guys who were extremely physically abusive, and I specifically remember one time a guy coming in the house and beating my mom up, and I must have been 3 years old, I think, at the time, and I remember taking a plastic machine gun and beating him over the back, and trying to get him off of her, and him throwing me across the room. You know, for what I was trying to figure out for 40 years was, why was I so mad? Why was I so dysfunctional? And why things around me always seemed to fall apart.
Most of my life, I was involved in drugs and guns, and I worked with Hells Angels and Mexican Mafia, and I just really was very purposeful at going the opposite direction from God. And when I was 30, everything pretty much caught up with me, and I was looking at a very long prison sentence, and God rescued me out of all of that miraculously. When I was let out of jail and didn't have to spend 20-something years in prison, I made a decision that I needed to change my life.
After 4 months of dating, they married. But after only 2 weeks, the honeymoon was over, and the reality of their unresolved pain was revealed.
Yeah, the physical and verbal abuse that I experienced created a mindset that women were good for two things. One, for sex, two, for abuse.
Tommy would get mad. His rage and anger would just overtake him. He was all about intimidating, and so there was a lot of screaming and yelling and shaking his fists at me and pretending like he's gonna headbutt me, so he'd get real close and just like roar in my face, you know.
Michelle turned to prescription drugs to cope with her husband's rage.
I felt like if I was really numb, I could keep myself from being really upset, or I could stay in control of myself, meaning I wouldn't lash out at him. I wouldn't start crying. I would just be like, don't care.
Meanwhile, the couple managed to mask the tension at home while serving as trusted ministry leaders at their church.
There was a perception in our church, I think, when people looked at us, that we were, this great couple, and my husband was so charismatic, and he was a great preacher. We would go to church and we would play church, and then we would go home, and it would be very destructive.
As the years went by, the arguments escalated. One evening after dinner and drinks, the violence became physical.
What happened in the car was, because of the language that I was using, Michelle reached over and just started punching on me.
There was such chaos and craziness happening in our car. When he actually reached over and punched me in the face, of course I was hysterical.
Police arrested Tommy and he was taken to jail. Once released, he reunited with Michelle. A month later, she found out she was expecting and gave up prescription drugs. 5 months into her pregnancy, she caught Tommy cheating, filed for a separation, and moved from California to Arizona. Without Tommy by her side, Michelle gave birth to a stillborn baby. Distraught and desperate for a better life, Michelle cried out to God.
I'd been through so much in my life before, and I considered myself to be such a strong person that nothing that ever happened to me would break me. But I was really broken. I got a hold of some teachings about the love of God. Like, who am I? Like, I'm not just a wife or a mother. Like, who is Michelle? Who am I? And I started really chasing intensely after the love of God. It was like I was resting and relaxing in just His presence. So it wasn't a show anymore. It wasn't about going to church and doing the Christian thing. It was about being a Christian alone in my room with Him.
Now divorced, as Michelle allowed God to heal her heart, Tommy was finally dealing with his anger.
And I started looking at and I really broke down 1 Corinthians 13 and so many other scriptures about love, this was what I had desperately been searching for my entire life. Because He was so patient and because He was so kind, it was that I knew that He was for me and that He had my back and that He wasn't mad at me and He wasn't disappointed in me. He just saw me as his son, and he loved me so much, and he had such a great journey for me ahead of me. And there was a true repentance that came in that moment or in that time frame.
The love of God filled me with compassion, understanding that my husband was very broken, that it wasn't that he was an awful, horrible man. It was that he was just as broken as I was broken, just in different ways, and it looked different. And I just knew that no matter what, I was going to believe for restoration of my marriage.
Michelle reached out to Tommy, committed to showing him the love God had shown her. As God healed them both, they longed to be reconciled with each other. When Tommy asked Michelle to marry him again, she said yes. Tommy and Michelle vowed to never engage in physical abuse again. Today, they find freedom and healing and wholeness as they share their testimony around the world. Together, they lead a marriage ministry and are pastors of His Place Church in Long Beach, California.
My marriage is the most amazing thing I've ever experienced in my life. I am married to a big teddy bear who just loves God and who loves me and loves himself.
Because you can't give away something you don't have. And for the first time, I really have love. And so I'm able to give it to her and everybody else. I see Jesus in our marriage today as the center of our marriage. Is that when we wake up in the morning, our goal is to be Jesus to each other. It's to love like He loved.
Today, I just can't imagine life being any better.